The Philadelphia Eagles welcome the upstart Washington Commanders in a battle for the NFC East lead. The Commanders' offense ranks as one of the best in the NFL, while their defense is doing just enough to get by. They face an Eagles team that is top 10 in offense and, check notes, top 6 in almost every major category on defense. Welcome to the Philly Film Room Podcast. Thursday's game against the Commanders is sure to be exciting, and it is somewhat of a litmus test for both teams, as both teams have had fairly easy schedules to date. So let's jump into the breakdown to see what we can expect on both sides of the ball. Starting with this offense, the Washington Commanders offense is led by offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury, and is headlined by names such as likely Rookie of the Year candidate Jayden Daniels, with Terry McLaurin at wide receiver. They currently rank 4th in points per game, 4th in yards per game, 4th in yards per play, and 2nd in EPA per play. So when we look at this team on film, it's clear they do want to run the ball on you, and they're very creative in the run game. They do a really good job of testing the eye discipline of your linebackers, safeties, and nickels that have to fit into the run game. They try to mess with the rules of the second level defenders fitting into the run, essentially trying to figure out who they're reading and then mess with their rules. They use a good job of using sift blocks while pulling offensive linemen the opposite way, all while using Jayden Daniels' legs as a potential run threat. So they stretch you horizontally in multiple different ways, and it's something that ideally the Eagles would have a full week to practice against, because it's a bit unique, some of the stuff that they're doing. You want to get reps against this stuff because you have to be sound in your run fits when you're playing the Commanders. In addition to that, they'll do all this movement with their tight ends, and then they'll leak them out into the flat, something we've seen from the Eagles offense. There's a lot of similarities to this Eagles and Commanders offense. They do a good job using motion one way and then pulling offensive linemen the opposite way. Again, the Eagles do this as well, so they should be prepared for that. But like I said, on a short week, we could see some issues and run fits for this Eagles defense. But at the end of the day, the best way to stop all this fancy stuff that any team tries to do is to knock the offensive line into the backfield and reset the line of scrimmage. The most important thing in football is the players on the field, the physicality that you play with, setting the tone and establishing the line of scrimmage. All this motion, all this pulling guys one way or another, is it important for the run fits? Yes. But if you can sit there and dominate the offensive line, then you can do a really good job of slowing this run game down. The Commanders run a shit ton of RPOs. They're third most in pass attempts on RPOs of any team this season. In addition to that, they help out their offensive line and Jayden Daniels quite a bit. They're roughly 19th in true pass sets, which are plays that remove screens, play action passes, throws where the time to throw is under 2 seconds, so a lot of RPOs. Really what they're trying to do is help their offensive line out from getting into 5 and 7 step drop back pass attacks. That greatly puts their offensive line on an island, and their offensive line, especially their tackles, just aren't that great. So they'll also use a lot of play action protections to slow down edge rushers. I talked about this in plenty of other podcasts. I touched on this as well in a breakdown when we were playing the Bengals and we were preparing for Trey Hendrickson. So check those videos out as well for more information on that. But on top of that, they're going to help a lot with chips from tight ends, wide receivers, and running backs before releasing late into routes. And that's not accounted for in true pass sets. They help out their offensive line a lot because they know that they're not very good at holding up in pass protection. Now, when we look at this matchup in the red zone, it should be pretty interesting. The Commanders really want to run the ball in the red zone. They're second in run rate in the red zone. The Eagles are first for comparison, but the Eagles' run defense has been excellent. So when they get to the red zone, they might struggle to run the ball a little bit more than usual and have to rely on their passing attack. And when we look at Jayden Daniels in the red zone, his passer rating is 23rd. His completion percentage is 27th at 51.3%. His on-target percentage is 12th though, so his numbers should be a little bit better than what they are. But his pressure rate is 20th, and they're also 21st in EPA per play on pass attempts and the red zone. So it's going to be important to see how the Eagles hold up against the run and the red zone, because that could be the difference in the game here. If the Commanders march down the field, because they're going to move the ball, if they march down the field and get to the red zone and just stall out on a bunch of drives, well, that's a big advantage for the Eagles. But speaking of Jayden Daniels, let's touch on him a little bit more. Jayden Daniels is definitely not playing like a rookie and has had a historically good start to the season. He's the real deal and can hurt you in many ways. He currently ranks 9th in passer rating, 6th in yards per attempt, 2nd in EPA per dropback, 2nd in EPA per rush, and just for comparison, Jalen Hurts is first. And while rushing quarterbacks tend to get a boost in their EPA per rush compared to running backs, Jayden Daniels is without a doubt one of the most dangerous threats on the ground from any quarterback in the NFL. His completion percentage is also 8th, and his turnover-worthy throw percentage is tied for 2nd. His time to throw is 31st in the NFL, but he will hold on to the ball to extend, and it's not that uncommon to see mobile quarterbacks have longer time to throw, but they do run a lot of quick pass concepts still, so they will get the ball out of his hands quickly. He has an excellent arm talent and a scary ability to throw on the run with his combined athleticism. He fits passes into tight windows with zip or with layered touch passes, and he does a really good job changing his arm slots when having to adjust and throw through traffic. He's excellent throwing deep passes as well, and he excels on slot fades. And anyone that scouted him in college knows that this was one of his go-to plays in college, and you can see it translating to the NFL. He currently has the second highest scramble rate when pressured. He's scrambling on 28.1% of his pressured dropbacks. That drops to 13th when not pressured. He's not necessarily a guy that is looking to scramble and run. He looks more so to scramble and throw, but he is definitely not afraid to tuck and run. The Eagles must play with good rush lane integrity in this game. And here's the thing, if you can get pressure on him, his technique will break down. He'll start throwing off his back foot and he'll make bad decisions, but he still is one of the better quarterbacks under pressure so far this year. Teams have been taking away Jayden Daniels as a runner in the second half of the season. Jayden has carried the ball on 8 design runs in his last 5 games. That was 18 in his first 5. His scrambles are down 2, as he had 28 scrambles in his first 5 games and 14 in his last 5. Here's the thing with teams that run a lot of RPOs and a lot of read option. You can dictate to the offense who is getting the ball. If the offense is reading a certain defender and the defense knows that, well, the defense can make a decision on who's going to get the ball. And lately, teams have been making sure that, especially in the run game, that Jayden Daniels is not getting the ball. Because this offense and this offensive line just can't really run the ball that efficiently if you are taking Jayden Daniels away. They need some better pieces on their offensive line to truly become the running team that they want to become. But at the end of the day, Jayden is still a threat. You have to make sure that you're taking him away. The offense as a whole and Jayden have cooled down a little since their early start, and part of that might be due to a rib injury that Jayden Daniels suffered in week 7 that is still playing a bit of a factor. And also, teams are likely just catching on to the scheme. And go back and look at Cliff Kingsbury's time as a coach. His teams tend to start hot in the first half of the year and then fall to the wayside as the year continues on. Looking at some of the other players for this team that we need to be aware of, Terry McLaurin. And a lot of Eagles fans know who Terry McLaurin is. He's pretty much terrorized the Eagles for a good portion of his years with the team, playing with a lot of bad quarterbacks. So now that he finally has a good quarterback, we're starting to see him flourish. And I think he is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And quarterback situations have just greatly underrated how good he is. He's solidly built at over 200 pounds with legit 4.3 speed. He will absolutely run by guys. He does align outside to the left on over 75% of his snaps, so he will be going against Quinyon Mitchell for much of the game. When he is aligned out wide, they run a lot of hitches, a lot of curls, a lot of slants, and a lot of fade routes. It's not a super diverse route tree that they're asking him to run, even though he can run a much more diverse route tree. He'll use the curls and the hitches to set up fade routes where he really sells the curl before bursting at the top of the route. So the Eagles need to be prepared for that. Don't fall asleep on all these curl routes they run because they will hit you deep over the top if you fall asleep on that. When he is in the slot, particularly on the left, I thought this was interesting. When they moved him to the slot on the right, he didn't run the same route tree. When he did move to the slot on the left, they ran a lot more slot fades against single high coverage, but it would be a lot more 4 verticals against zone. So that's something to pay attention to as well. He just has a really good connection with Jayden Daniels, especially on deep routes and especially on those slot fade routes or on deep routes. And I don't think it's that big of a shock that he is very good on connecting with Jayden Daniels on those slot fades. Jayden Daniels was killing it with Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. at LSU. And in addition to that, they're also really good. They have a really good connection on scramble drills where with Terry finding the soft spots and Jayden rolling around and scrambling around to find him. Now, looking at some of the other options on the team, Noah Brown is their number 2 receiver right now, and he actually is tied for the most targets on the team since week 8. He dealt with a little bit of an injury around week 5, and I think they're easing him back in for the next couple weeks. But since week 8, in the past 3 games, he's tied for the most targets on the team. He is more of a rotation number 3 than a number 2, and I think he's best on crossing routes, working through zones. Again, we've talked about this guy leading up to the season when we hadn't traded for Jahan Dotson at that point in time. We'd speculated and hoped that the Eagles would go out and get a guy like Noah Brown to do a lot of the dirty work and some of the stuff that you want out of a number 3 receiver. But he's having to play the number 2 for the Commanders, and he's produced to a degree, but again, he's probably a guy that's best fit for a number 3 or a number 4 role. There's a reason why the Houston Texans ended up cutting him. Looking at Zach Ertz, he's actually tied with Noah Brown for the most targets on the team since week 8. I know a lot of people think it's Terry McLaurin, but this offense really does spread the ball around pretty well. So it's kind of hard to just key in on one specific guy. Zach Ertz does run the most slot snaps on the team, and he'll be utilized on short and intermediate routes. He's currently 12th in average depth of target, so it's not like they're just using him on dump-offs like we saw with end-of-career Jason Witten. He's still very good at understanding leverage, how to use his body to get open, and he does a good job with stems and head fakes to create separation at the top of the route. He finds the soft spots and zones, although he is not much of a yak threat as he is last of all the qualifying tight ends in yak. Now, Ertz and Terry McLaurin are the Commanders' go-to options on third down, and I don't think they need to necessarily dedicate a whole lot of coverage to Terry McLaurin in this game, just knowing that they do spread the ball around a lot. But on third down, I do think they need to make sure that they have a game plan in place ready to take away Terry McLaurin on third downs. Looking at some of the other players on their offense, Brian Robinson Jr. at running back. He is a physical downhill runner, and the run game is much better with him involved. You must tackle him or he will run through you. He has good short area quickness and vision, though he doesn't have the greatest long speed, so he's not going to hit a lot of home runs, but he does hit a lot of doubles. So he has currently missed the past couple games with a hamstring injury. We do need to pay attention if he's going to play this week because he has been limited throughout this week in practice. Their backup running back, Austin Ekeler, is now seeing a resurgence playing with a better team and also not being a bell cow back. His efficiency has dropped as he's increased his workload with Brian Robinson Jr. out, but he is a good receiving threat out of the backfield, and they will align him all over the field trying to get him the ball in the passing game. Now, moving on to the offensive line and our weekly question of who was blocking Jalen Carter. And this week, we know for sure it's going to be Sam Cosmi. He's currently 21st out of 89 qualifying offensive guards and pressure rate allowed. I don't think this is going to be like the easiest matchup in the world that Jalen Carter has faced, but I don't think Sam Cosmi is so good that you're not going to see a productive day out of Jalen Carter. And on top of that, with everything we've talked about with what the Commanders do to help out their offensive line, again, that does help to negate some of the stuff that these guys do. But I still think Carter should be able to flash throughout this game. Looking at the rest of the offensive line, Nick Allegretti is their left guard. He's 39th out of the qualifying offensive guards and pressure rate. Milton Williams and Moro Ojomo are really high. I think they're both top 10 in pass rush win rate. So I don't think this is going to be an easy matchup for Allegretti. And he's, for the most part, been a rotational backup in his career with Kansas City. And he's now stepping into a starting unit for the first time. So I think that says a little bit about him. But he's been better than I think most people would have expected. Looking at their left tackle, though, this is going to be interesting. Something we need to pay attention to. Is it going to be Brandon Coleman, their rookie, or Cornelius Lucas, who is, I think he was an undrafted free agent from 2014. He has stuck around the league for quite a long time. They rotate these guys throughout the game. When they're both healthy, they will rotate both of them in the same game. So that's something to keep in mind. But if Coleman's on the field, hopefully he is the one that gets to play because Cornelius Lucas missed last week. Coleman is 67th out of 92 qualifying offensive tackles and pressure rate allowed. And that's with all the help that they give to their offensive linemen to begin with. So hopefully we see Coleman out there because he is a sieve and he will give up pressure even if you are helping him out. Now, Andrew Wiley at right tackle. Eagles fans should know this guy well. He played for the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, but whenever he's played the Eagles without a slick field, the Eagles have gotten the better of him. He currently has 0 sacks allowed this season, but again, that's also the benefit of getting a good amount of help from his offense and from the scheme. Now, it's important to note he was active last week, but did not play due to injury, and he was limited all last week in practice, and he's been limited again so far this week in the estimations of their practice reports. So it's something to pay attention to. It's not a surefire thing that he will play this week, even if he is limited all week long. Now, all 3 tackles have been limited in practice this week, so we're not really sure who is going to be starting. That's something that we're going to need to pay attention to, but at the end of the day, none of their tackles are guys that should be feared. Looking at this defensive game plan and what I think that they should do to have success in this game, number 1, make someone else other than Jayden Daniels beat you, right? Especially in the run game. Don't let him get the ball on the option game. Now, I will say, throw in a changeup here and there, throw in some scrape exchanges to keep him guessing, and you can potentially get a negative play or a unsuccessful play for the offense by giving him a false read and then having a guy loop around ready to contain him. I showed this off a little bit on when the Jaguars played the Eagles a couple weeks ago. So again, check out that video for a little bit more detail on what the Jags were doing and how the Eagles countered that. But again, at the end of the day, you got to make sure Jayden hands the ball off to someone else. Make someone else beat you on the ground. In addition to that, don't let him escape when he is passing the ball. Don't let him scramble, because if you let him scramble, he's going to hit chunk gains for 20, 30, 40 yards. This guy's got some serious juice to him. Now, to counter all the chips and just to help that the Commanders will give their offensive line on obvious passing downs, I would shift to some of their 5-0 fronts, where you got the 5 defensive linemen essentially lined up head up on the 5 offensive linemen directly in front of them. Now, it doesn't have to be all defensive linemen. It's probably going to be Zach Bond shifting to the edge like we've seen in numerous games throughout this season. But what this allows you to do is get one-on-one matchups along the interior. So you can now avoid those chips. Those defensive ends will still get chipped, but you're getting one-on-one matchups on the interior. You can overload the A-gap with some pressures, and that likely forces the running back to stay in to block. And then you can get a 7-on-4 advantage in the pass game. That is always a plus for the defense, even if you don't get a sack. Now, in addition to that, what I would do to help alleviate some of the pressure from those chip blocks is to waste some of those chip blocks by dropping your defensive ends into coverage, right? If they're going to sit there and help the defensive ends anyways, send pressure up the gut, drop those defensive ends into coverage, and then you're negating that advantage that the offense is trying to give themselves. And then on top of that, I would use those same fronts and then run a number of different stunts on the interior as well. I would add to that as well, because they're not just going to live in those same fronts on obvious passing downs or on other downs, but I'd run some of their simulated pressures a lot for the same reason of what we talked about with the 5-0 fronts, of what you can do. You can force running backs to stay in the block if called against the right protection, and then you can also drop the edge rusher into coverage and waste that chip block as well. So those are a couple things that I would do in regards to trying to generate some pressure. Now, I did talk about trying to keep Jayden Daniels contained in the pocket when he drops back to pass, but we can throw in some changeups in there, right? So why not bait him into a trap where you run a stunt, a really kind of a delayed stunt, where you're having your edge rusher dive inside, you give him an open lane, and then you have a player or defender spying that quarterback, waiting for him to take that bait, and you can get some negative plays for the offense that way. At the end of the day, though, this defensive line and this front really should be able to handle the front for the Commanders. As long as they're sound in their run fits, I think they should be able to slow down the Washington Commanders offense, at least slow them down to so they're not putting up points at the 4th highest rate in the league. Now, switching to the other side of the ball and looking at this defense is led by head coach Dan Quinn and defensive coordinator Joe Witt. It's headlined by names like Daron Payne, Bobby Wagner, and Marshawn Lattimore when he returns, although he is out for this game. Their best defensive lineman is Jonathan Allen, and he is out for the year. They currently rank 12th in points per game, 14th in yards per game, 21st in yards per play, and 18th in EPA per play. So not the worst defense in the world, but I do think they can take advantage of this defense in numerous ways. Number one, this defense plays a lot of cover one, or at least they want to.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
It's probably not a good idea against the Eagles, especially with their current options at corner. There's a reason why they traded for Marshawn Lattimore, but again, he's likely missing this game, so I don't know how much cover one we're actually going to see. They're currently starting Mike Sainristil, who was a rookie projected for the slot. He's now currently playing outside just due to who they have on their roster right now. Their other corner is Benjamin St-Juste, who currently ranks 109 out of the 116 qualifying corners and yards per coverage snap. So this is a secondary that you can really target. They will flip their corners, but I can't imagine that they're going to try and put their 5'9", 182-pound slot corner on A.J. Brown. But they did have him cover Pickens for much of last game versus the Steelers, so I don't know. It would make more sense for St-Juste, who is 6'3" and 200-plus pounds, to match up with A.J. Brown, but he's also not very good. So they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. I got to imagine they're going to play more cover 2 and lean on more cover 3 than cover 1. Cover 2 is their typical changeup to their single high coverages, but it's become more of a go-to coverage for them due to personnel. They're running cover 2 at the 5th highest rate in the NFL currently. On top of that, they will blitz a lot. Frankie Luvu has the second most pass rush snaps of any non-defensive lineman with 100. He's 21st out of 65 qualifying linebackers in pressure rate, and that's linebackers that have had a minimum of 20 pass rush snaps. He's also 7th in pass rush win rate as well. Bobby Wagner, for his part, is 16th in pass rush snaps with 53, and he's 7th in pressure rate among linebackers, and he's 1st in pass rush win rate among qualifying linebackers. On top of that, they will use a lot of stunts on pass downs as well, and this has all resulted in them being 10th in sacks and 6th in sack rate. The run defense isn't very good though, and I think this is an area that the Eagles need to try and exploit, and I imagine that they will. They're currently 29th in yards per attempt, 17th in EPA per rush, and 28th in explosive run rate. They're not very good, but you can see some signs of improvement as they've gotten to learn this defense a little bit more. But at the end of the day, that has resulted in teams running on them at the 4th highest rate of any team in the league this year, and I expect that's going to continue in this game. Now, I did expect to see more line movement from a Dan Quinn defense, but a lot of that is probably due to the fact that in Dallas last year, Quinn had to do that probably because he had to play a safety at linebacker just due to the number of injuries that they had at linebacker last year. Now, there is talk about their defense improving, and I think some of that has to be due to the fact that they are just a little bit more comfortable in the scheme, and Dan Quinn knows his personnel a little bit better now. But they've also played a really easy schedule, and especially during the second half of the season, they still gave up 30 points to the Ravens right before their hot streak on defense started, and they gave up 28 points to the Russell Wilson-led Steelers. And I still think there's holes on this roster, so I don't think this is a defense that's going to come out here and necessarily shut down this Eagles offense. Looking at some of the player matchups, let's start with their defensive line. Dante Fowler on the edge. He's 3rd in the NFL in sacks with 8.5. He's 5th in pressure rate, but 43rd in pass rush win rate. Here's an interesting fact. Every single pass rusher outside of Dorance Armstrong and maybe the couple of guys that have played a handful of snaps have a higher pressure rate than pass rush win rate. That is the exact opposite for the Eagles. The Eagles pass rushers have higher pass rush win rates than pressure rates. A big part of that is because of the scheme and what they're doing to help get their edge defenders and really their pass rushers overall sacks and pressures. When you look at Dante Fowler, a lot of his sacks and pressures are coming from stunts and from cleaning up plays due to high effort where the quarterback had to hold on to the ball a lot. He's not winning a lot in one-on-one situations. Now, running stunts is a skill, and an offense still has to stop that, right? So it might not be the traditional sense of how Dante Fowler is getting sacks, but at the end of the day, he has 8.5 sacks, and it's not like these sacks are just, he's flying clean off the edge and just smoking guys. He is having to work through contact. But in terms of a one-on-one pass rush, I don't think he's going to get a ton of pressure against the guys that we have, especially if Jordan Mailata is back this week. Looking at Dorance Armstrong, he has 3 sacks, and he's 17th in pressure rate, but 13th in pass rush win rate. But he's going to be going against Lane Johnson the majority of the time, so he's not a guy that I'm going to be focusing too much on. Now, looking at their interior pass rushers, Payne is a solid pass rusher, and he's currently their best interior pass rusher with Jonathan Allen out. But he has a similar story to Dante Fowler, where he ranks higher in pressure rate than pass rush win rate, and it's because the scheme is helping him out a lot as well. And then when you look at Jer'Zhan Newton, very, very similar story to Dante Fowler, where he ranks much higher in his pressure rate than pass rush win rate. And when you look at the vast majority of Newton's pressures, they came against a banged up and bad Bears offensive line. So I don't think he's going to get all that much pressure on the Eagles this week. Looking at Bobby Wagner, he is still a really good linebacker, and he was an All-Pro last year. He's instinctual, physical, and plays with great technique, and you will hear his name a lot on Thursday night, especially against the run. Looking at some of their other players, Frankie Luvu and Chinn are both veteran pieces on this defense as well. But again, you really need to be prepared for a Luvu when he's blitzing. I think that's the best part of his game, and really he's just okay at the other stuff. He has 5 sacks as well, so he's someone that will get pressure on the quarterback. But overall, this defense needs better pieces on the edge and at corner to really improve. My offensive game plan going against this team would be to run the ball. That's the Eagles' bread and butter, number one, and the Commanders are just not going to stop this rushing attack. So it'll allow them to control the clock. It'll force the Commanders to play into single high coverages, and when that happens, then you can get AJ and Devontae outside attacking their weak corners. Now, they need to be prepared for their blitzes and stunts. I'd have a couple designer screens specific for this game built in and be prepared with hot routes. But on top of that, I'd also have plenty of half-field options in the game plan. We've touched on this in many of the preview podcasts, but to your one side, have your cover 2 plays, your cover 2 beaters. To the other side, have your single high beaters, just based on how often they are going to run cover 2. Now, looking at the score prediction, Thursday night games are always hard to project. They're always sloppier, and you just don't know what you're going to get from teams that haven't been able to truly prepare for the other team. And that can work both ways. A lot of times it can work against the offense, but it can also work against the defense, especially when the defense is facing a team that has a somewhat unique offense that they haven't really seen too much of earlier in the season. Ultimately, I think the Eagles are the better team top to bottom, and they should be able to lean on their offensive line and the run game. Defensively, the front should be able to control the line of scrimmage and limit the rushing attack, especially if they can take care of Jayden Daniels and make him hand the ball off. This Eagles pass defense has been incredible as of late. See the Cincinnati Bengals game, and I do expect some regression, but I don't think they'll give up a ton of points outside of random events like turnovers and special teams blunders. They don't give up a lot of explosive plays. Both teams prefer to run a lot, which I think leads to a running clock and a shorter game pace. And though both teams hit on a lot of explosive plays, I think it's going to be the Eagles more likely to generate explosives through the air. So while I do see this one being tight, with the Eagles playing at home on a short week, I think that gives them the boost. And I have the Eagles winning this one 27-23. Now, that will be it for today's preview podcast. We will be back on Sunday with the review podcast. But as always, remember to like, subscribe, and spread the word. And until next time, go Birds.